A former casino floor manager just told me something that casinos spend millions trying to keep quiet. Her name is Michelle, and she spent 8 years walking the slot floors of three different Las Vegas properties before she finally quit last year. What she revealed to me wasn't technically illegal for her to share, but she made me promise not to use her real name or identify which casinos she worked for. The reason became clear about 10 minutes into our conversation when she said something I'll never forget. Once you understand what employees know about those machines, you can't look at a casino floor the same way again. What you're about to learn comes from Michelle and 13 other former casino workers who've reached out to me over the past 6 months. These are slot technicians, surveillance operators, data analysts, and floor supervisors who've left the industry and are now willing to share what they know. These 5 secrets could change everything about how you approach slot machines. The casino industry protects these insights carefully because they represent the difference between casual losses and devastating ones. What you're about to discover isn't illegal to know, but casinos would strongly prefer you never find out. Let's start with secret number one. Secret number one: slot placement isn't random, it's strategic psychological warfare. Michelle told me that during her first month of floor supervisor training, she sat through a 3-day course that had nothing to do with customer service or machine maintenance. Instead, she learned about traffic pattern analysis, player psychology mapping, and what her trainer called strategic machine positioning. She showed me a diagram she'd kept from that training, a color-coded casino floor map with machines categorized by RTP ranges and placement psychology. The machines at the end of aisles, near the buffet entrance, and within sight of the casino cage weren't randomly positioned. According to Michelle and 2 former slot technicians I spoke with, these high-visibility positions typically house machines programmed with RTP percentages in the 86 to 88% range. These are what employees call show machines because they're designed to create visible activity, frequent small wins that make the casino floor look lively and lucky. Meanwhile, the highest RTP machines, those running at 92 to 94%, are tucked away in corners and low-traffic areas where only knowledgeable regulars think to look. Michelle described a floor supervisor named Sarah who worked at the same property during Michelle's 3rd year. Sarah had developed what Michelle called an obsessive approach to machine placement strategy. She'd created her own unofficial maps tracking player behavior patterns throughout the day and repositioning machines based on psychological vulnerability points. The tightest machines, those with the lowest RTP settings, went near the entrance where excited new arrivals were most likely to sit down impulsively. Machines with slightly better odds were positioned near the exits because, according to Sarah's theory, winners leaving with casino money became free advertising when they told friends about their good fortune. The most predatory placement, according to Michelle, was positioning the absolute lowest RTP machines within 20 feet of ATM stations. Michelle explained the logic with disturbing clarity. Players who've walked to an ATM are already in a desperate mindset, already chasing losses, already making decisions driven by emotion rather than reason. These players, Sarah believed, wouldn't notice or care about machine selection. They'd sit at whatever was closest and resume playing as quickly as possible. But here's what makes this even more calculated. Michelle revealed that every 3 to 6 months, her casino would rotate machine positions throughout the floor. Just when regular players started figuring out which machines seemed to pay better or which locations felt luckier, everything would shift. Michelle described this rotation process as deliberate disruption of player pattern recognition. A former slot technician I spoke with, someone who worked at a different property than Michelle, confirmed this practice and added a darker detail. He claimed that floor managers would literally track which machines their regular players favored, then deliberately swap those machines with tighter ones during rotation periods. The goal wasn't just random redistribution. The goal was preventing players from developing reliable knowledge about where better odds machines might be located. This isn't random placement based on available floor space or aesthetic considerations. This is deliberate psychological manipulation based on traffic flow analysis, player desperation indicators, and behavioral psychology research. And if you think strategic placement is manipulative, wait until you hear secret number 2. Secret number 2 is machine programming, something one employee said kept him up at night. The former slot technician who contacted me called himself Marcus in our encrypted email exchange. He wouldn't video call, wouldn't voice call, and insisted on using a burner email address that he said he'd delete after our conversation ended. His paranoia made sense about 20 minutes into our exchange when he described what he called the thing that made me realize I couldn't do this job anymore. Marcus had worked as a slot technician for 7 years across two major casino properties, one in Atlantic City and one in Las Vegas. His job involved maintenance, software updates, and what he described as monitoring system performance metrics. That last responsibility was where things got uncomfortable. Marcus told me that modern slot machines, particularly those manufactured after 2017, run sophisticated player tracking algorithms that go far beyond the basic card reader, systems most players know about. These machines monitor your betting patterns in real time, analyzing data points that include your bet size changes, your play speed variations, how long you hesitate between spins, and how your betting behavior shifts over the course of your session. According to Marcus and internal documentation he claims to have seen, this tracking system is designed to detect what casino software engineers call session abandonment indicators. These are behavioral patterns that suggest a player is preparing to leave. The system watches for specific triggers. When you reduce your bet size after playing at a higher denomination, the machine registers this as a potential exit signal. When you suddenly speed up your play, burning through your remaining credits faster than your previous pace, the algorithm recognizes this as terminal play pattern, the final rush before cashing out. When you've experienced a sustained losing streak over a mathematically significant number of spins, the system understands you're approaching a psychological breaking point. Marcus described this monitoring as session abandonment prediction modeling, and he claims it was presented to technicians as a standard feature during training on newer machine models. Here's where it gets disturbing. Marcus alleges that when these systems detect you're about to leave, something changes. Not the fundamental RTP, he was careful to clarify that. The long-term return to player percentage remains within the legally programmed parameters. But the timing of bonus triggers, the frequency of minor feature activations, these allegedly shift slightly. Not dramatically enough to affect the machine's overall mathematical performance across thousands of spins, but enough to deliver what Marcus called a hope hit, right as you're preparing to cash out. You'll get a small win, maybe 20 to 30 times your bet, just enough to make you think your luck might be changing. Just enough to generate the thought, maybe just a few more spins. Marcus described watching surveillance footage as part of a training exercise, video of players exhibiting these abandonment behaviors. In the footage he reviewed, which he said covered multiple machines over a 6-month period, 78% of players who received these hope hits immediately reinserted their tickets and continued playing. The feature wasn't being presented as manipulation in the training. It was being called session optimization and engagement extension technology. The manufacturers, Marcus said, described it as enhancing player entertainment value by delivering exciting moments at optimal psychological intervals. He walked me through a specific case that haunted him. A player, man in his 50s, had been playing a penny denomination machine for about 90 minutes and was down approximately $800. Marcus was monitoring the machine remotely because it had flagged a minor technical alert earlier in the day. He watched as the player's bet size dropped from max bet to minimum bet, a clear abandonment signal. He watched the play speed increase dramatically. Then he watched as the machine triggered a bonus round that paid $42 on a 40-cent bet. The player, who had been reaching for the cash out button, pulled his hand back. He increased his bet size again and kept playing. Over the next 2.5 hours, Marcus watched this pattern repeat 5 more times. Each time the player showed clear signs of leaving, preparing to walk away with whatever remained of his money, a small win would hit. Not a major jackpot, not even a particularly impressive win, just enough hope to justify continuing. By the time the player finally left, he'd lost $3,200 in a session where he'd tried to quit 6 different times. Marcus said he reported what he'd observed to his supervisor, framing it as concern about the ethical implications of the engagement prediction system. His supervisor's response was brief and unambiguous. The system was legal. The randomness requirements were still being met because individual spin outcomes remained unpredictable, and Marcus needed to focus on technical maintenance rather than player behavior philosophy. Marcus left the industry 4 months later. The reason this exists in a legal gray area is because gaming regulations focus almost exclusively on outcome randomness and long-term RTP percentages. As long as each individual spin result is genuinely random, and the machine pays back its programmed percentage over statistically significant play periods, the timing of when those wins occur receives much less regulatory scrutiny. These engagement algorithms don't change what outcomes are possible. They allegedly influence when certain outcomes occur within the legal parameters of the machine's programming. And speaking of machines making decisions you think are yours, secret number 3 involves something employees call the heartbreak shift, and it has to do with when you play. What time you sit down at a slot machine might matter more than which machine you choose. Before I reveal this timing secret, I want to ask you something. Before I tell you about the heartbreak shift, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to this channel. I have connections with 14 former casino employees, and they keep sharing information that I turn into videos exactly like this. And let me know in the comments, what time of day do you usually play slots? Morning, afternoon, or night? Because what I'm about to tell you might make you completely change your casino schedule. Thank you. Now here's the secret about timing that employees say is the biggest advantage they have over regular players. Secret number 3, the shift change, sweet spot, and time-based programming. Jennifer spent 5 years as a casino host at a mid-sized property in Reno before she relocated to the East Coast and left the industry entirely. When we spoke by phone, she told me something that 3 other former employees later independently confirmed. Casino slot performance isn't consistent throughout the day, and according to Jennifer, that inconsistency isn't random variance. It's programming. Jennifer described something floor managers called the grind shift, a term that initially confused her when she first heard supervisors use it during her training. She assumed it referred to the slow, grinding pace of overnight shifts when player traffic dropped to almost nothing. But after 6 months on the job, she realized the term meant something different. The grind shift was when the machines themselves were set to grind players down most aggressively. According to Jennifer and documentation she claims to have reviewed during her time in player development, her casino programmed different hold percentages for different times of day, adjustments made within the legal limits allowed by their gaming jurisdiction. The tightest settings ran during peak hours, Friday and Saturday nights between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. when the casino floor was packed with weekend players who'd driven in from surrounding areas specifically to gamble. During these windows, Jennifer said machines ran at what employees knew were their highest hold percentages. A former slot technician I spoke with separately described a similar system at his property. He told me about 3 different setting profiles that his casino deployed: weekend night mode, weekday afternoon mode, and overnight mode. Each profile stayed within legal RTP requirements, but the differences were significant enough that employees noticed and talked about it amongst themselves. Jennifer explained the logic behind these time-based adjustments with the same unsettling clarity that Michelle had used to describe placement strategy. During busy weekend nights, the casino floor generated its own psychological momentum. Crowds created energy, excitement became contagious, and the noise and activity of hundreds of players masked individual losses. A player losing money quickly in that environment was less likely to notice or care because the atmosphere felt lucky and fun. The social reinforcement of being surrounded by other gamblers created emotional insulation against rational assessment of losses. So the casino could run tighter settings during these peak windows because the environment itself compensated for the increased extraction rate. Players would tolerate faster losses when the experience felt exciting and social. Conversely, during slow periods, Tuesday mornings or Wednesday afternoons when the casino floor was nearly empty and every loss felt more obvious and isolating, the machines allegedly ran at looser settings. Jennifer claimed the goal was encouraging any play at all during these dead hours, and players needed to win enough to justify staying rather than leaving for a better experience elsewhere. She described running her own unofficial study over an 18-month period where she tracked her high-value players' results based on when they visited. She found that her players' average loss per hour was 35% higher during Friday and Saturday night sessions compared to Tuesday morning visits. The difference was so consistent that Jennifer said she started quietly advising her favorite players, the ones she genuinely befriended rather than just professionally managed, to avoid weekend peak hours entirely. The shift change windows themselves represented a different kind of opportunity, according to multiple former employees. Shift changes typically occurred at 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and 10 p.m., and During the 20-minute windows when floor staff was transitioning, attentions scattered across handoff procedures and briefings. Some former workers claimed these transition periods were when brief setting adjustments occurred, quick recalibrations between the time of day profiles. A former floor manager told me something that Jennifer had hinted at but never stated directly. After she left the industry, she stopped going to casinos on weekends entirely. She knew what the weekend settings were, she'd seen the internal performance data, and she described those peak hour programs as brutal. She told me that employees used to joke about it amongst themselves, a dark humor acknowledgement of what they all understood. It's Saturday night, they'd say to each other while watching packed slot floors. The machines are in take mode. Now, timing is one thing, but secret number 4 is about something employees can literally see that you can't. Secret number 4, employees can tell if you're going to win. Big before you do, Raymond worked as a slot attendant for 11 years at a tribal casino in Connecticut before retiring last year at age 62. When we met at a coffee shop 40 miles from the property where he'd spent over a decade, he brought a small notebook filled with what he called his jackpot journal, handwritten observations he'd been recording since his 3rd year on the job. The notebook contained dates, machine names, contribution amounts, time since last major hit, and his personal predictions about when progressives would pay out. Raymond told me he started keeping these records after he realized he was developing what felt like a sixth sense for approaching jackpots, an ability that made him increasingly uncomfortable the more accurate it became. According to Raymond and 3 other veteran floor employees I spoke with, experienced casino workers can predict major jackpots before they hit based on machine behavior patterns that remain completely invisible to players. This isn't supernatural intuition or gambling superstition. It's pattern recognition developed from watching thousands of jackpot cycles over years of daily observation. Raymond explained that while individual spin outcomes are genuinely random, progressive jackpots run on mathematical cycles that become visible when you have access to information players don't see. Every progressive machine has a contribution meter that tracks how much money has been fed into the jackpot pool since the last major hit. Players see the jackpot total displayed on the machine, the accumulated prize amount, but they don't see the contribution data that employees can access through back-end systems. Raymond described his prediction method in detail, a process he'd refined over thousands of hours watching progressive machines cycle through their mathematical curves. He tracked 3 primary data points: the contribution total since last jackpot, the time elapsed since last major hit, and the player traffic patterns on specific machines. He'd learned that progressives rarely hit at the extreme ends of their theoretical ranges. A machine with an average hit frequency of every $50,000 in contributions would almost never pay out at $20,000 and almost never wait until $80,000. The jackpots clustered around predictable ranges, mathematical probability windows that became obvious when you watched enough cycles complete. Raymond's notebook showed his predictions alongside actual results. Over a 6-month test period he'd conducted during his 9th year of employment, he'd correctly predicted major jackpot timing within 2-hour windows 67% of the time. The pattern recognition went deeper than just contribution tracking. Raymond and other long-term employees described observable machine behaviors that seemed to precede major payouts, subtle changes in how the machines performed, in the hour or two before jackpots hit. Raymond claimed that certain machines would show increased near-miss frequencies in the 100 to 200 spins before major wins, reels stopping just short of jackpot combinations more frequently than normal. A former floor supervisor told me she'd noticed that bonus round spacing seemed to change before big hits, with bonus triggers becoming less frequent, like the machine was conserving resources before a major payout. Another veteran attendant described specific audio pattern changes on older mechanical hybrid machines, subtle shifts in reel sounds that he swore predicted jackpot probability windows, though he admitted this sounded absurd when he tried explaining it to newer employees. The advantage this knowledge provided was substantial. Raymond admitted that he played slots on his days off, something many casino employees do despite the industry discouragement, but he only played progressive machines that his tracking indicated were mathematically due. Over 3 years of selective play based on his contribution monitoring and pattern observations, Raymond won 4 jackpots ranging from $8,000 to $23,000. He described watching tourists pump hundreds or thousands of dollars into progressives he knew weren't ready, machines that had hit recently or hadn't accumulated enough contributions to be in their probability window. Then, hours or sometimes days later, he'd watch a regular player or another tourist hit the jackpot he'd known was approaching. The guilt of possessing this knowledge while watching uninformed players chase jackpots that weren't due yet became, Raymond said, one of several reasons he eventually left the industry. The documentation he'd seen during his employment, internal casino reports analyzing jackpot frequency distributions and contribution patterns, confirmed what his observations had taught him. Casinos tracked time since last hit and contributions since last hit obsessively, monitoring these metrics across every progressive on the floor. A former data analyst told me about internal dashboards showing what staff called jackpot readiness scores for each progressive, probability calculations based on historical performance data and current contribution levels. These systems were allegedly used for staffing decisions, ensuring attendants were positioned near machines likely to hit during their shifts, and for subtle marketing adjustments, promoting machines that were mathematically due to pay. Raymond showed me screenshots from an online forum where current casino employees discussed jackpot tells and shared information about which progressives were running hot on their respective floors. The informational asymmetry was staggering. Players saw a $50,000 progressive and assumed it was due simply because the number seemed large. Employees saw that same machine hit at 50,000 last time after only 32,000 in contributions, meaning it wasn't actually in its probability window yet despite the impressive display amount. Raymond told me about casino policies that seemed designed to prevent employees from exploiting this knowledge advantage. Some properties banned workers from playing slots during off hours, officially explained as preventing conflicts of interest, but quietly understood as limiting insider information exploitation. Raymond's property didn't have such strict policies, which was how he'd been able to act on his predictions, but management would allegedly discipline employees if they won too frequently, suggesting they were using knowledge inappropriate for regular players to possess. The mathematical reality that Raymond kept returning to during our conversation was this. While every individual spin remains random and unpredictable, jackpot timing follows statistical distributions that become clear when you have years of observation data and access to contribution tracking systems. That distribution knowledge represented a massive edge that employees possessed and players never would. And if you think having invisible information is unfair, secret number 5 is about something even more fundamental. This final secret is what one employee called the guilt I carry, and it's about who casinos really target. Secret number 5: employees are trained to identify and enable problem gamblers, not help them. David worked as a casino host for 8 years at a mid-tier property in Pennsylvania before he quit in March of last year. When we spoke over video call, he insisted on keeping his camera off, but I could hear something in his voice that I hadn't detected in my conversations with the other former employees. Where Michelle had sounded matter-of-fact and Raymond nostalgic, David sounded like someone confessing something he'd carried alone for too long. He told me he'd reached out because he'd been seeing a therapist for 6 months trying to process what he called his casino guilt. And his therapist had suggested that talking publicly about his experiences might help him make peace with the role he'd played in other people's suffering. During his first week of host training, David sat through presentations that he initially interpreted as responsible gaming education. The training covered how to recognize signs of problem gambling, players who missed meals to keep playing, visitors who made multiple ATM withdrawals in a single session, guests who displayed extreme emotional volatility, swinging between euphoria after wins and visible desperation after losses, people who borrowed money from strangers at nearby machines, players who left the property only to return within an hour or two. David assumed this recognition training was preparation for intervention protocols, learning to identify struggling players so the casino could connect them with help resources. He said it took him almost 3 full months on the floor before he understood the training's actual purpose. The recognition protocols weren't designed for intervention. They were designed for optimization. Players exhibiting 3 or more problem gambling indicators were flagged in the casino's player tracking system with a designation that David's property called high-frequency valued guests. These players received elevated host attention, more frequent complimentary drink service, personalized greetings from floor staff who'd been coached to remember their names and preferences, and strategic offers for free room upgrades, meal comps, and show tickets. David described training sessions that used the phrase strategic generosity teaching hosts how to calculate the optimal comp investment to sustain play patterns. The formula his trainer presented suggested offering approximately 2% of a player's theoretical loss in comps, enough to make them feel valued and create emotional obligation without significantly impacting casino profit margins. David's breaking point came during his 4th year as a host. He'd been assigned to cultivate relationships with regular players in a specific slot zone, learning their habits and preferences to maximize their comfort and frequency of visits. One of his regulars was an elderly woman he called Mrs. Chen, though that wasn't her real name. Mrs. Chen visited 4 to 5 days per week, always playing the same bank of penny denomination games near the casino's north entrance. David's job required tracking her play through the casino's monitoring system, and he watchdog as her average loss per visit climbed from $600 during his first year managing her to nearly $1,000 by his 3rd year. The player development software his casino used provided detailed biographical profiles compiled from players' club applications, casual conversations with hosts, and data purchases from third-party information brokers. David learned that Mrs. Chen was a 72-year-old widow living on Social Security benefits and her late husband's modest pension. His responsibilities included building genuine-seeming friendship with Mrs. Chen. He sent her birthday cards signed with personal messages. He provided Quan for complimentary lunches at the casino buffet timed to arrive during periods when her play frequency data suggested she might be losing interest. He greeted her warmly by name whenever he saw her on the floor, asking about her garden and her grandchildren, details she'd shared during conversations David had been trained to encourage and document. He made her feel seen and valued and special, while she systematically lost her retirement income $20 at a time. David told me he felt sick describing this, but he forced himself to continue because he said someone needed to hear it stated plainly. Mrs. Chen disappeared from the casino for 3 weeks during David's 5th year as her host. When she returned, she looked visibly older and moved more slowly. David approached her with his practiced friendly greeting, and she told him she'd been hospitalized with a cardiac event. She'd missed her prescription refill deadline during her hospital stay, and when she'd finally gotten home, she couldn't afford the medication co-pays because her bank account was overdrawn from her last casino visit. Before the hospitalization, she told David this while smiling weakly, like she was embarrassed to be bothering him with her problems. David went to his supervisor and explained the situation, suggesting they suspend Mrs. Chen's player's club account temporarily or connect her with the responsible gaming resources the casino advertised in small print on bathroom stall doors. His supervisor's response was to comp Mrs. Chen a lunch voucher and provide David with a $20 promotional slot play credit to give her as a welcome back gift. David quit 6 weeks later, though it took him another 3 months to actually submit his resignation because he kept convincing himself he was overreacting or being too sensitive. 3 other former hosts I spoke with described similar breaking points, specific moments when they recognized that the empathy and relationship skills they'd been hired for were being weaponized against vulnerable people. One described a regular player who lost custody of his children partially due to gambling-related financial instability, while the casino continued sending him promotional offers. Another talked about a woman who'd gambled away her inheritance while the host assigned to her delivered increasingly generous comps to keep her comfortable in playing. A former floor manager told me about internal metrics that casinos tracked obsessively but never discussed publicly. Her property's player development division maintained detailed reports analyzing revenue contribution by player category and problem gamblers exhibiting compulsive behavior patterns generated between 40 and 60% of total slot revenue despite representing less than 15% of active players. She described quarterly presentations where executives celebrated high percentages in something called core revenue sustainer retention, corporate language for keeping addicted players actively gambling. Marketing budgets allocated disproportionately toward high-frequency player retention programs, sophisticated direct mail campaigns, and personalized promotional offers designed to maintain engagement with players whose behavioral patterns indicated problematic gambling. David told me about the responsible gaming infrastructure that casinos implemented to satisfy legal and regulatory requirements. Every property displayed helpline numbers prominently. Most offered self-exclusion programs where players could voluntarily ban themselves from the casino. These programs existed and technically functioned, But David said in 8 years, he never once saw management encourage a struggling player to use them. He saw dozens of instances where hosts were coached on keeping high-risk players comfortable and playing. He saw promotional materials still being mailed to self-excluded players, database errors that management seemed remarkably slow to correct. He heard floor supervisors joke about self-exclusion processes being deliberately complicated, requiring multiple forms and in-person visits to complete, barriers that made desperate players give up before finishing the enrollment. The former employees who contacted me all expressed versions of the same guilt, the cognitive dissonance of being genuinely good at jobs that required authentic human connection, while understanding those connections were facilitating harm. They knew their regulars' names and birthdays and favorite machines and grandchildren's names, and they watched those same people destroy their lives $20 at a time while smiling and bringing them drinks and making them feel valued. Several described the psychological breaking point as sudden recognition that they weren't in the hospitality industry at all. They were in the exploitation industry, and management had simply branded it as customer service excellence. These 5 secrets paint a pretty dark picture of information asymmetry between casinos and the players who walk through their doors every day. So let's review what these casino employees know that you don't. They know exactly where machines are placed based on psychological manipulation, positioning the tightest games near ATMs where desperate players won't notice or care, rotating machine locations every few months just when regulars start figuring out which spots might be better, deliberately disrupting any pattern recognition you might develop. They know machines are programmed to detect when you're about to leave, monitoring your bet size changes and play speed variations to identify abandonment signals, then delivering small hope hits right as you're reaching for the cash out button, keeping you in your seat for just a few more spins that turn into hours. They know which days and times run tighter settings, that the weekend nights when the casino feels most exciting are exactly when the machines are grinding you down most aggressively, and they tell their own families to avoid Friday and Saturday peak hours, because they've seen the internal performance data. They can predict jackpots before they hit using contribution meters and pattern data you cannot access, watching progressives cycle through mathematical probability windows while you're playing blind, believing that big number on the display means the machine is due. And perhaps most disturbingly, they're trained to identify problem gamblers, not to help them, but to optimize their extraction, building genuine-seeming friendships with vulnerable people while those people systematically destroy their financial lives. Every single one of these secrets represents information asymmetry, knowledge that casino employees possess that gives them a massive advantage over you, or more accurately, knowledge that casinos possess and weaponize against you while their employees watch it happen. Notice the pattern across all 5 secrets. Every single one involves casinos using information, psychology, and technology against players in ways those players never suspect. Slot machines are random. That part is true. The gaming regulations ensure that individual spin outcomes remain unpredictable and RTPs stay within programmed parameters. But that randomness operates inside a system deliberately designed to maximize extraction. A carefully constructed architecture of manipulation that most players never recognize exists. The former workers who shared these secrets all express the same frustration that players walk onto casino floors believing they're operating with full information, believing the only edge the house has is the mathematical advantage built into the games themselves, never realizing there's an entire invisible infrastructure working against them. There's strategic placement designed to catch you at your most vulnerable psychological moments. There's algorithmic timing manipulation that delivers hope exactly when you're about to leave. There's temporal programming that tightens during the hours when environmental excitement masks your losses. There's pattern data that employees can see while you're playing completely blind. And there's systematic identification and enabling of addiction that's been rebranded as customer service excellence. The house edge wasn't enough. The guaranteed mathematical advantage that would inevitably profit the casino over time wasn't sufficient. They needed to layer on strategic placement and timing manipulation and behavioral prediction and addiction optimization, because apparently just letting math do its work was leaving money on the table. The employees who shared this information all mentioned guilt, that specific cognitive burden of knowing too much to unknow it, watching people lose homes and marriages and retirement savings while smiling and bringing drinks and pretending this was normal. Once they left the industry, once they no longer had to perform that daily pretense, the dissonance resolved and they could finally name what they'd been participating in. Several told me they share this information now because they couldn't share it when it mattered, when they were still on the floor watching it happen in real time. These are the warnings they wish they could have given you back then. The truth they wanted to speak, but couldn't without losing their jobs. One former manager told me she spent years helping the casino win, and now she wants to help players at least understand what they're actually up against. You now know 5 things that most slot players never learn. You know to avoid end-of-aisle machines and high-traffic positions. You know Tuesday through Thursday afternoons might offer slightly better odds than weekend nights. You know that small win right as you're leaving might not be lucky timing, but algorithmic manipulation. You know that progressive jackpots follow mathematical patterns invisible to you, but obvious to staff. And you know that casino friendliness toward frequent players might be strategic cultivation, rather than genuine hospitality. This information won't beat the house edge, nothing will, but it might help you lose less and recognize manipulation while it's happening. Knowledge is the only advantage players have in an environment designed by experts to separate you from your money as efficiently as possible. If you found these insider secrets valuable, this channel exists specifically to share this kind of information. I maintain relationships with former casino employees across multiple states, and they continue providing insights that I turn into videos like this one. Subscribe so you don't miss the next set of secrets. And seriously, let me know in the comments. Which of these 5 shocked you the most? Casinos spend millions on employee training, strategic systems, and psychological research. You're walking into an environment designed by experts who've optimized every element for maximum extraction. The only way to level the playing field even slightly is understanding what employees understand. Now you know what they know. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? In my next video, I'll be sharing what a former surveillance worker revealed about facial recognition and player tracking, and it's more invasive than you think. You won't believe what they're actually monitoring about your behavior. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, the house always has an edge, but knowledge gives you a fighting chance.